Hello, everybody. Hi. Dearly beloved, we gathered here today to talk about your network. Hi, I'm Tom. If you want to talk in the back, that's totally cool by me, because if I can't keep your attention, then feel free to do whatever you want. So I'm all good with, I gotta get it closer if you want to hear me. Can everybody hear me all right? All right. Hi. I'm going to give a talk this week about, I know what your network did last summer. So first of all, a little bit about me. My name is Tom Pohl. I'm a principal consultant at LMG Security based in Missoula, Montana. I actually spend a lot of time in Des Moines, a lot of time in Montana, so I go back and forth a lot. So, I basically help manage the penetration testing team at LMG Security. In fact, I got two of my coworkers here today, Brian and Derek. You should say hi, they're over here. They've been robbing banks all week. They're really good at it. So if you want to know how to break into a bank, go talk to those guys later, because they're really good. I'm not even joking. What is it? Body count was 5 banks? In and out, undetected, hooked stuff up to networks, the whole deal, right? Yeah, the whole deal. All right. Well, at any rate, so I get to help out on the penetration testing team, and I get to kind of help mentor the team a bit, and I get to jump into everyone's engagement. So whenever people are assessing the security of networks, internal, external, web applications, wireless networks, you name it, I'm involved in a lot of that. And so what I'm talking about here tonight is basically a lot of the things that we've seen. And I'm not talking about stuff I seen 2 years ago. I'm talking about some of the stuff that is in my presentation tonight I saw on Monday. So this stuff's fresh, and I see it all the time. And my goal with this talk is not to shame or name or do any of these things. It's that I see this in a lot of organizations, and it's probably in some of the organizations representing this in this room as well. And so I'm passionate about helping everyone be better and do better, right? That's what I say all the time, right, guys? I do. Say be better and do better. At any rate, before we start, I want this to be very interactive, right? I like questions. I like people interrupting me. I want people, interjecting their own thoughts. And if you have a really good question, just like last year, I brought these great shot glasses. They're rubber, so when I throw them, they won't break, but they might leave a mark. So keep your wits about you. And good questions get good shot glasses, right? So I'm really excited about that. Anyway, well, let's get started. First of all, I want to make sure everybody knows misconfigurations happen, right? Sometimes the default configuration is a misconfiguration or not an optimal configuration. Sometimes people go out of the way to make things easy. Something's not working at 12 o'clock at night, and you hack and hack and hack, and it's finally working. Don't mess with it, right? And sometimes they'll leave you in a bad state to be discovered by either hopefully somebody like myself, and hopefully not a bad guy, but a lot of things can go wrong on networks, and I'm going to show you some of the things that we've seen, and hopefully some ways that you can solve those problems and find them on your own network. All right, so the first one I want to start talking about, because I see this everywhere, is insecure protocols, like old school broadcast protocols, right? Like LLMNR, MDNS. Actually, MDNS is pretty new, but it's a little bit harder to get rid of. NetBIOS, and then with DHCP and WPAD. So these are basically broadcast. Most of them are broadcast protocols. Like LLMNR, the way it works is if you first go to DNS, you say, hey, I want to access WoW, right? And he says, the DNS is I don't know who you're talking about. Well, your Windows computer will generally be oh, okay. Well, maybe if you don't know who it is, I'm just going to go ask on the network, say, hey, anybody on the network know how to get to WoW? And usually, nobody will respond and be I don't know anything about it. But if I'm on your network, I'm going to respond and say, I'm WoW. You want to talk to WoW? That's me. And so basically, that's the way a lot of these broadcast protocols work. Is you send out a message on the network saying, "Hey, I want to talk to a thing," and the network, if I'm on your network, I'm going to respond back. Yep, I'm your daddy. And so we use a tool called Responder. Anybody here use Responder? Heard Responder? Know what Responder is? About probably half the audience. Yeah, you guys. It's an open source tool. It's primarily used by penetration testers, but it's really good because it's one of these tools that will it actually has a couple different purposes. One is to poison traffic. So when somebody says, "Are you my mommy?" I can be like, "Yes, I'm totally your mommy." And then the other purpose is to actually do a handshake. So when somebody wants to talk to me on that service that I just told you that I'm your server for, I can then do your authentication and then grab password hashes and things, or do NTLM v2 handshakes and things of that nature. And so that's what the first. If you first just fire up responder to actually do poisoning and handshakes, that's what will happen. It's like, say, I want to access resource X. Well, I'll be there. Say, yep, I'm resource X. And then when you try to actually connect to me on like Samba, we'll do like a file share, like connect to me as a file server. I'll do this NTLM v2 handshake where you can prove that you know what your password is, and I'll be like, yeah, that's totally not it. And then you keep retrying. But meanwhile, I can have this hash that I can take to a password cracker, and if your password's weak enough or I have enough time, I'll figure out what your clear text password is. And so that's what responder is. And so all those old school legacy broadcast protocols, make sure you just make it so that you cannot. Your computers do not use them, because when you use them, bad things will happen when I'm on your network, or other bad people. Yeah, right here. Force it to use NTLM instead of Kerberos? I mean, probably. I mean, like it's like the default config. I mean, pretty soon, like aren't they like disabling NTLM here pretty soon? So in 10 years, maybe we'll see it stop. Coming soon to a theater in a year, so everybody can unconfigure it. I'm sure you can do it. You could probably disable it, Kerberos. Then it would fall back to NTLM. Don't do it. Yeah, for a lab, really? Yeah, there's a reason for that. You shouldn't do that. Here you go. Drink your way to. Here. There you go. So yeah, like I said, you don't want those so you want to use Kerberos, right? You want to use the newer authentication mechanisms so that you're not doing NTLM. NTLM v2 should go away, and it's going to go away someday. It's not going to be anytime soon, even though we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Stay tuned. Maybe they'll make it easy. And then, so also, next I'm going to talk about SMB signing, right? And so SMB signing, you can find this on your network. So if you scan like port 445 across your network and you use Nmap scripts, you can see is SMB signing enabled? And basically what that is, it's a message digest that you can't, if I'm in the middle saying, hey, I'm your mommy, I can't actually be that real server, right? So I can't prove that I'm the actual server on your network. And when you do an Nmap script, it'll say it's enabled but not required. This is the default currently, right? So the only servers by default or machines on your network by default are typically your domain controllers that'll have message signing enabled and required. So most of the time it's optional. So if you've got an optional server, somebody can show up and be like, oh, I don't want to do, I don't want to have to do SMB signing. It won't force you to. And if that's in those cases, that's when I'll use a tool called NTLM RelayX. And I typically use this in conjunction with Responder. So what I'll do is I'll disable the handshaker in Responder. Yeah, Mr. Stark? How do I avoid these problems? Don't turn on Samba. No, actually, there is security settings in the Samba conf for enforcing signing. At any rate, so NTLM RelayX. So what I'll do with this tool is once I find hosts on your network that don't have server-side signing, I make a list of those. And I say, hey, when I can get somebody to do that handshake dance with me, what I do is I actually don't do that handshake dance. You connect to me, and immediately in my target list, I connect to one of those servers. And I say, hey, I totally want to do a handshake with you from over here. And they're like, okay, here's my challenge. And so I send that challenge back to the client, and I say, hey, yeah, I totally want to handshake with you, and I send the challenge that the server sent me. And then they'll do their hash and send that back, and I'll send that back to the server, and the server's like, oh yeah, you totally got the password right. And what happens is I'm in the middle, and I got somebody else to connect to me to do the authentication for me. Because of SMB signing being disabled, that's possible. And so, and then when I do that, I set up a SOX proxy. So basically, I keep that connection to the server open. And then I use other tools like proxy chains in front of all my other tools, like SMB client, to then connect to use that open connection that somebody else authenticated for me in order to access file shares and things of that nature. So anything that you do over 445, I can now do with that server because you authenticated for me. And I'm sitting here in the middle of that. And like here in this example that we're looking at, and first of all, I have to apologize. There's a lot of redaction in all these slides. If you see a slide that's not redacted, it's because it probably came out of my lab environment. But we're very careful to never leak any information. Like if you see here, you'll see like the first number and the last number of an IP address, and that's about all you're going to end up seeing. So I'm going to have to describe it for you. But basically in this example, we're using a tool called SMB client to talk to an IP address, and we give it a user and a password, a username and a domain, and it'll prompt me for the password. Now you just hit enter, because proxy chains, when you use that proxy chains in front, NTLM Relay X will say, oh, I've got a connection for that host and that username and password. So instead of trying to actually authenticate, it'll say, oh, I'm going to use that already established session to run my SMB command. And so that's what we're doing right here is I'm using SMB client to list the file shares of a server for a connection that I've already got established. And so you can see here, that there's a few share names like Hyper-V Instant Recovery Disk and Virtual Failover and Windows 8. This looks like a Unitrends box of some sort that we've gotten somebody else to authenticate for us, that then now we can have access to this Unitrends server based upon somebody else's access. So this is server-side signing. So if you have SMB signing enabled, I can't do this, right? So if I try to be that man in the middle and do that authentication handshake, there's a message signature in those requests that I can't forge. And so I can try to remove it from the client if the client has signing. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But in general, you turn on SMB signing, the responder or this with NTLM Relay X is kind of a moot point in the case of talking to SMB servers. So definitely turn on SMB signing everywhere in your network, but test it, because if you don't test it, you're going to have a problem. Right here. SMB signing is not on by, the latest operating systems, I think they're starting to turn it on, but from a server environment, your domain controllers will have it on by default, but all your other servers will not, typically. So, oh, did it leave a mark? Apologize. Yeah. I have to watch out which shot glass I'm throwing, because Brandon poured me some really amazing, something out of a big bucket up here. They said it's really good. If I start hallucinating in the middle of the talk, it's his fault. Yeah, not on by default. Hopefully here in the near future, it will be on the default everywhere. But that also doesn't mean that it can't be unconfigured at some point. In fact, I'll have an example later in my talk today where a domain controller had SMB signing disabled. Like, you have to go out of your way in order to make that happen. And so, like I said, sometimes, people hack on things and make changes, or maybe they move objects around their Active Directory and a different group policy gets applied or something like that. It's easy to misconfigure your network or unconfigure your network accidentally. And like I said, always being diligent about looking at how your network is configured is super important. All right, so you can also, with this man in the middle, you can target more than SMB. In this particular example, I'm going to talk about targeting a service called LDAP, a Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. And I think a year ago, I talked about printer hacking. I think we went into a good example a year ago doing some of this. But LDAP is basically kind of the heart and soul of Active Directory, right, on your Windows network, where you know, that's where all your user accounts live, all your objects, all your relationships, all your roles, rights, and so forth. Password hashes, they all exist in Active Directory. And so what we're going to do is first thing, when we get on your network, I'm going to look at all your Active Directory servers, and I'm going to say, can I relay to your Active Directory server? And I've got a tool, it's called LDAP Relay Scan, where basically you connect it to one IP, one of your domain controllers. It's actually going to go and query and say, okay, where are all the domain controllers? And then it's going to go one by one to each one and test if you've got what's called channel binding enabled. So if you've got, it's kind of like SMB signing, but it's for LDAP-S. If you want to test for LDAP signing, you actually have to provide it credentials. Me, I'm on your network, I don't have credentials yet. So I'm only going to check for channel binding. Likely if you don't have channel binding, you probably also don't have LDAP signing. And so in this particular case, this network, they had what looks like 4 domain controllers. I redacted all of the IPs. One of the 4 domain controllers did not have channel binding set. So when I want to do an LDAP attack, I know which one I want to go attack, right? And so this is very common where, and I'll see this over and over again, where like, you know, you'll have a bunch, like there's, you know, you'll have like 20 domain controllers, you know, 5 domain controllers. Like almost all of them are the same configuration, but you'll have one that's different. This is exactly that case. So yeah, right question right here. So the question is does that come from different versions of the server, or how does that happen essentially, right? And here's your shot glass. The answer to that is it depends, right? You know, some organizations, they've got legacy infrastructure, and so when you're migrating between domain controllers, often what happens is like you won't turn off the old domain controllers, right? You stand up new domain controllers, and then you'll demote old domain controllers and then turn them off. How often does that happen? How often is it that you added 2 more domain controllers, now you've got 4 domain controllers, and then you've got another priority that came up, and you're like, you know what, 4 domain controllers is good. We're just going to leave those other 2 on. And that's often because you tried to turn it off, and then you realized somebody else had a printer that was pointing to the old domain controller IP address, and now as soon as you turned it off, they couldn't scan to email, right? So I mean, this is how these things happen, right? And so you know, understanding how servers are used, because I can almost guarantee that's probably what happened here. This is likely their oldest domain controller didn't have channel binding. The new ones were set up and configured properly, and that's why they were standing them up, was because they have better configurations, and then they just never decommissioned. Or maybe they're in the middle of the project, and I caught them in the middle of the project, right? But at any rate, that's often how this kind of stuff happens. Is people don't go back and reconfigure the old servers to have better security standards. They're like, you know what, I'm just going to stand up new, and we'll just turn the old stuff off when we're done with it. And then that doesn't happen. Yeah. Am I right? Anybody in the house agree with me? Does this resonate? Okay, awesome, sweet. Okay, so this is me running responder again. I'm poisoning some more traffic, and then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run NTLM RelayX, my fun, fancy tool that does that man-in-the-middle handshake. But this time, instead of targeting file servers, I'm going to target your LDAP, right? And I'm going to add the TAC I on the end for interactive mode, and then I'm going to basically get somebody to do that NTLM handshake to LDAP for me. And then once I do that, there's lots of functions that are available. So I'll tell it to localhost on 11,000, which is provided by NTLM RelayX, and I've got fun, fancy options. One of which is add computer. So for a shot glass, this is a real question. I think I asked it a year ago and nobody knew. How many a standard user account, non-privileged, regular user account, how many domain accounts can that user account create? In the back. 10. That's exactly right. Nice catch. My NFL career is going to be off to the races here soon. Yeah, so by default, any user account can create up to 10, not user accounts, but machine accounts, right? So like if you've got a user account on the domain and it's not domain joined, a regular user account can domain join that computer to the domain. And so if I've now middled a regular user account and you've got the default configuration, I can now create a computer account. What's the difference between a computer account and a user account? It has a dollar sign on the end of it. That's actually really good. That's true. Generally, in my experience on most networks, a machine account and a user account practically have the same privileges for standard users. In fact, sometimes, what's that? I'm sorry. Oh yeah, the computer accounts aren't monitored. That's right. Are the passwords get locked out? I don't think so. Yeah, not monitored. And actually, sometimes, depending on what you're doing, a machine account may actually have more privileges than a user account. Well, I've got an example of that later too. So in this particular, this is actually in my lab environment where I middled a session, created a computer account, and then now with that computer account, I can go do all the things. Like, what can I do now that I've got an account, right? So I started on your network, didn't have any access, spoiled some traffic, got somebody to do a handshake with me. I created myself an account. So now I have a username and a password. That username is a machine account, so it ends with the dollar sign. I've got a password. What can I do with it? I can look at file shares, right? I can look at your group policies. I can look at your password policy. So when I do get handshakes, I'd be like, you know, if your password policy is 14 characters higher, I'm not going to try anything lower than that. I'm going to definitely, use password attacks that are going to be compliant with what your organization's password policy is. I'm going to look at your profile scripts. You know what's fun? How often do I see passwords and profile policies? Not daily. And actually, a lot of times I don't see it anymore, but there's usually a subdirectory called old. And in the old directory, that's where the password, that's where the profile script that used to use the password in the script before, they're like, that's a bad idea, we shouldn't do that. But we shouldn't get rid of that script because what if we missed something? And then you changed it, you've got a new profile script, but the old one still lives there because nobody's ever going to go delete it and clean it up until I come along and I'm like, hey, I found your domain admin username and password in this bat file, and it still works, and it's 6 years old. And then you can also, once you have an account, you can go to LDAP and you can actually dump all the users, you can dump all the relationships, you can see who is a domain admin, right? So it's like, if my goal and objective is to become kind of God mode in your Active Directory environment, I need to know who that is. Who do I need to go impersonate? Once you have credentials, you can do another thing with Kerberos called Kerber roasting, where you can go to the domain controller and you do requests and see who's already got a ticket. And I can actually get a copy of your ticket. And then once I get your ticket, then I can put that in a password cracker, and I can try to see if I can crack your password. And then I can also do things like I can use other tools. Actually, we had the Bloodhound guys here a couple years ago, right? And you can actually enumerate the entire domain. So I can actually query Active Directory, which will give me all the computer names, and then I can go to every computer in your environment and see if I can get sessions and shares and all sorts of information from every computer in your environment and really build that giant picture of what your organization looks like and enumerate your entire domain and more. And more is coming. So this is typically what I can do. I'm going to show you one of my favorite things. In fact, my guys, I guarantee they'll know exactly what I'm going to say. When you're a standard user, right, and you're in your Windows network browser and you browse to a file server, you see your shares on the server, right? Because you're a standard user. You see the shares that the administrators want you to see. But when I'm an attacker, first of all, does anybody know what a hidden share is? What's a hidden share? It's a share name that has a dollar sign on the end. So if you've got a regular share name like users or shared or something like that, it's just got that name. But if you put a $ on the end of the share name, it now becomes invisible and it doesn't show up in the share list. But to me, as an attacker, I will iterate and I'll show all your share name or all your shares. You'll see here you can see other things like admin, admin dollar, C dollar, IPC dollar, printer dollar. Those are standard hidden shares that like people don't need to see them, and you don't typically have access to it unless you're a domain admin or an administrator of that machine or what have you. But sometimes I'll get on your network, and if it's not a C dollar, D dollar, or IPC, but I see a $ at the end of the share name, like right here I see deployment $, why would I put a share name on your network, put a $ behind it, so it's hidden from all the users? Why would I hide it? Anybody? Yeah, right here. Could be. It could be necessary for a program. You don't want somebody to tamper with it. Yeah. You know why I think it's there? Because, we're in the back here. Security through obscurity. That's a good one. That's good. The reason why is because your system admitter's hiding something. Seriously. So I always say to my team, I'm like, $ mean $. If I'm an attacker and if I see a C dollar or something other than the C dollar, D dollar, and I see a $, that means you're hiding something there. Typically, do you know what you're hiding? A password. You're typically hiding credentials, or maybe it's a share that like users need to be able to write to, but you don't want them to know about it. Like I've seen stuff where like user machines will log stuff to that share, but you don't want them to know that you're logging stuff to that share. Often I'll see this in deployments. Like, has anybody ever created auto deployment servers, right? So you get a brand new machine on the network, you hit F12, you boot from network, and then it builds it up with your gold master image, and it joins it to the domain and all that stuff. How are you joining it to domain? With a credential. And if you have a misconfigured deployment server, or like most people do because that's the way it used to be done, you're going to have typically I've seen it as a domain admin credential in your deployment share folder. And so that's almost like easy mode, like this is the big red glaring light saying, hey, this is where a hacker needs to come look. Right? You may be hiding it from your users, but you're making it stand out like a bright shining light to your the penetration tester or the adversary on your network. Cool? Cool. All right, let's keep going. All right, so that was server side. Now client side. So the message signing can also be requested by the client. So when a client connects to the server, the client be like, I totally need you to do message signing. And the server's like, well, it's enabled but not required, but if you want to do it, we can do it. That's cool. And so what happens is, and I've always seen this on a network, that people will either have client signing enabled or server-side signing enabled. I've never seen it where somebody's had both. But in this particular case, say their server didn't have LDAP signing, but they required client signing. So when I tried to relay their credential, I can't tell if a client requires signing until I actually try to do that dance with them. And so you'll see failed messages, or you won't get handshakes. And so if the client's saying, no, I need it signed, then what'll happen is when I try to do that dance in between, I'll be like, I'll try to kind of remove remove the mic off of the connection. But if the client said, no, I have to have signing, I'm not going to be able to middle that connection with that protocol necessarily. Yeah, go right here. There's actually two different settings there. One is require it regardless, and another one is require if the server enables it. And so there's two different levels of client signing that you could configure. Is that what you're coming from? That's a great question. I have to get back to you. I haven't. Yeah, there should be. I don't know on the client side because it's going to be dependent upon who's trying to do that handshake. Right here. Is there a way to fake this output to confuse the attacker? No, I'm going to generally no. I mean, if you get into the debug logs of my tool, I can see that you're requiring message signing. So yeah, you're not. I've never seen anything where I'm confused. Like I generally know what's going on here. And so, but in general, if you've got client signing enabled, and actually this is actually kind of a bogus screenshot, but you're not going to get failed messages. You're just not going to get handshakes because I'm not going to be able to even get to the point where I can have a failed message. Because the client's gonna, you're just gonna get nothing. And I'm just gonna try to do that handshake, and it's gonna be like, yeah, it's not gonna go through because you're not gonna accept the challenge that comes back from the server because I couldn't sign it. All right. So that's client signing. Any other questions on client signing? All right. I always, if you have to do NTLM, I always recommend both. If you can, I disable NTLM altogether. And that's hopefully the way the world's going, but they're not quite there yet. So let's move on. Next, I want to talk about anonymous authentication on your networks. Did you know often on your networks you'll have things that you can log into that you don't need any credentials at all? These are fun. So some of them are like SMB null shares, where basically I can connect to a file server and say, hey, my username and password is blank, right, or nothing. And the server's like, oh, that's cool. I'll still let you have some access to files. And if you always show up with a username and password, it's going to work the same way as if you show up without a username and password. And so it's good to test these things, right? So somebody may have configured it and opened up the privileges, and people are always logging in with a username and password, but they don't have to. So if you're not looking, you might have it and you don't even know it. Another one is iSCSI. iSCSI is a block-based protocol on the network where you can log into a target and then actually have a hard drive on the network show up like it's as if it's connected physically. So that's iSCSI. A lot of times your login endpoints don't have authentication, so you can just say, hey, I want to log in with no credentials, and be like, okay, cool, you can have access to my hard drive. NFS is another one that's typically used in Unix systems. And then the one I want to talk about is SAM-RPC. And this is, I see this recently. I've had it's probably closer to 50% of the time on these networks, even networks where people have come in and they've been doing pen tests in their organization for years, still either has this and nobody's told them about it, or they just haven't called it out. But it's basically, SAM has a protocol, the security account manager. So this is the thing that has access to all your passwords, right? There's an RPC endpoint that by default on a lot of versions of Windows lets you query that. And I'll show you on the next page here. I use a tool called NXC or NetExec. That used to be there's another tool called CrackMapExec. The whole world's kind of moving from crack. I'm going to say this wrong if I have to. I can't say it 10 times real fast. CrackMapExec to NetExec. And this is a tool I use constantly. It's like my Swiss Army knife for doing most things against your organization. But in this case, I'm using the SMB module, and I'm connecting with no username and no password, just like you might do for an SMB null share, but I'm going to go against SAM-RPC. And so I do --users, and what it does is it tries to do an unauthenticated connection to the SAM-RPC. And then what can it do? It does one thing really well. It dumps all the usernames and descriptions and failed login attempts and last logins and things like that. So you can actually, if this is enabled on your network, I can now have the entire user list of all your users and computers as well as their descriptions on your entire network. I can also gain access to your group members. The reason why I've redacted so much in the screenshot, this is the one I saw not like a month ago. I saw this on Monday. So I jumped into one of my coworkers, Corey's, on a penetration test of a very large organization. And I generally jump in and I'll try certain things where I'm kind of cataloging different vulnerabilities I see across different organizations, across different industries. And so this is one of the benchmarks. I jump in here. Here's what's interesting. So one of these user accounts is a domain administrator account. And in the description field of probably more than 10 accounts, they had the password in the description field in clear text. Sometimes it'd say password equals, and they have the password there. In this particular case, I'm like, that looks like an important account. That looks like a password. I went and authenticated the domain controller, and guess what? I was domain admin. 30 seconds in, did this thing die? Oh, okay, sorry. So 30 seconds into this engagement, we had domain admin because we did an anonymous query of SAMRPC, and the passwords are sitting right there. So if you're not looking at the descriptions, how many times does this happen in an organization you've known of? Don't admit it to yourself, but somebody maybe has left the organization. I was Andrew, I think I was talking to you about this earlier. Somebody was in your organization, they left, but you couldn't disable their account because they had hooks into everything, right? This is somebody who's been there forever. So you changed the password, and then you just put it, to be helpful, you put that new password in the description field so that, you know, when somebody's like, oh, it's not working, it's, oh, because I changed the password, it's in the description field. So when somebody like myself comes along, I'd be like, cool, I'm just looking, generally, if I can get any kind of a domain credential on your network, I'm going to get all the way to the domain admin. I like the challenge of like starting with nothing and then creating or getting that access to the original domain credential. But often, if I just have a simple credential on your network, I'm definitely going to get domain admin. There's very few cases where that isn't the case. All right, so this is SAMRPC. Anybody want to go run home and go figure out how to install NetExec? You can brew install it now. So if any Mac users out there, I actually got brew to install NetExec for me the other day. It's great. We use a specialized version of Ubuntu where we customize all the tools, and actually we use PTF. Does anybody know PTF? Pen Tester Framework? Is put out by oh my gosh, I was going to say Binary Defense. It's Dave Kennedy's other company, TrustedSec. Thank you. Yeah, great. Yeah, his organization puts out PTF. It's an amazing set of tools. I love Dave Kennedy. He's an amazing guy. He does really great things. If you don't know Dave, go look him up. He's a remarkable gentleman. So SAMRPC, that's fun. So now I'm gonna go from SAMRPC, and I'm gonna talk about some of these more like, so these are like the things you're gonna find on every network, right? Or I see on lots of networks, right? These broadcast protocols, these bad practices, insecure mechanisms. You also need to make sure that you're patching, right? Do you have a patch management system? Are you applying patches? Are you like, oh, you know, it's just a thing? In this particular case, I'm going to talk about this power panel. In fact, the guys that discovered these vulnerabilities and chained them together spoke at DEF CON this year. I think it was this last year. It was either 30 or 31. CyberPower has this enterprise class tooling that you run on a Windows PC, this domain join, and then you point it at all your other UPSs, and it can help you manage your uninterruptible power supply or power grid across your entire organization. This one's super awesome because basically on that login page, it's hard to see here, but there's you'll see if you search in the source code for LDAP, there's a display : none. And what you do, you just inspect element, and you change it to display : block, and you get this drop down, and you say local system or LDAP. And so you hit the drop, so you change that to display block, you close your little inspector window, and the drop down, you choose LDAP. It already has like a bogus account and password like there. I think it's just star as an account. But all you got to do is hit the login button, and you're in. That's it. So it's an authentication bypass that's so easy. It's amazing. You're like, okay, cool. So I could shut off servers. I could wreak havoc and so forth. There's another exploit that they came up with, which is brilliant. And then, in fact, I'm pretty certain either I'm running a different version than what they were demonstrating at DEF CON, or they kind of left out an important detail, so you couldn't just do this at home. You actually had to understand what it is that they're doing, and I looked at what they were doing very, very closely in the videos that they published. And in here, there is a configuration option for doing a backup. So you can take your configuration and you can back that up to a server on your network. They looked at they decompiled the C# code And they realize what's going on is they're taking the parameters from the web form and they're stringing them together to create a command to execute. It sounds like SQL injection, but for the command line, right? It's command injection. And so what you do is you fill out the fields here, and you can actually terminate one command, run your own command, and then allow it to continue on with the rest of the command. They're going to get errors, but it doesn't matter because command's going to run in the middle. So I use Burp Suite. This is a tool that kind of lets you get in the middle of web requests. And the reason why I say that there's some pieces that they left out in their examples at DEF CON, they injected into like the username field, and they put in their own PowerShell script there. But I can tell you, the version I'm running, it's base64 encoded. So whatever you put in on the page, they base64 encode it and send it to the server. So you actually would have to, and I couldn't get it to pop that way. So I don't know if they tried to mitigate this by doing this in injection. But since I actually read the decompiled C# code, I realized that the absolutely not base64 encoded parameter called storage path was straight up clear text, not base64 decoded. So that's where I injected my reverse shell. So if you can see here, it's really small, but I basically put in a PowerShell command that says download and execute tomshell.ps1. If you see tomshell.ps1 on your network, be afraid I'm there. But what that is a reverse shell. So it's a PowerShell reverse shell that I've got that will basically download. So I've run a little server on your network, or maybe it's off your network, and I've got command injection from the internet. At any rate, if it downloads my tomshell.ps1 and executes it, I'm going to have a shell on that box as whatever user is running that service. In this particular case, I'm system, so NT system. So I'm a local system authority user on that box. And so once I'm a local system user on that box, what I did in this particular case is created a local administrator account. So I created my own LMG admin account. I added that user to the local admins group. Why would I do that? Persistence, prove I was there? Yeah, there's another really good reason. It's because I can then dump remotely, I can dump your SAM and I can dump your LSA, assuming you don't have endpoint protection. This is a UPS thing. You're not going to have endpoint protection on that. So in this particular case, so then across the network, I dump the SAM. So I've now got the administrator hash, right? Not the NTLM hash or NTLM v2 handshake. I've actually got the NTLM hash. With that hash, you can actually use that elsewhere on the network. So I don't know what that password is necessarily unless I crack it, but I can still use it. And then I'll also have the same with your machine account. So maybe if I didn't have a machine or didn't have a domain account, since this thing's domain joined, I now have the machine credential or the NTLM hash of your machine of the machine account itself. So now I can impersonate this machine on your network to other things. So like how with the LDAP example, I created my machine account. Now I can just assume the identity of another machine account. But here's what's scary. Now that I have this local administrator hash, what can I do with that? Well, what I did in this, what most people will do, is I took this hash and I went to every machine in your entire environment that has SMB, and I tried to log in with it. Not a domain. This is not a domain account. This is a local account. So the difference in Active Directory, you're like, before your domain join, all your usernames and passwords are managed in the SAM database on the local machine. Once your domain joined, then you can log in with a domain credential and log in and get in there, but they're still local accounts. And so often you'll have these accounts, like say it's a break glass account, right? Like somebody can't log, they can't talk to the domain controller, but you still need to log into the machine. You'll use the local administrator in order to log into the machine. And it's usually you can log in from a Windows prompt. You'd either put in the machine name or you put in a dot or whatever it is for the domain that you would log to log in the local machine. So I use this administrator hash and I go to every machine in your environment. And you can see there's a bunch that say status log on failure, but then you see a bunch that say the words that's in yellow there. It says PWN3D exclamation point. What does that mean? Pwned. That means I have it, that this is the local administrator password of all these other machines. Is that a good idea? Anybody? For me, it's great. Well, it's great to help you find that problem. Come on now. Why does this happen? Oh, here, so your first shot glass. Why does this happen? Why do people use the same password? Over here. Image cloning, that's exactly usually the number one reason. And that's why a lot of times you will have it on sets of servers, right? I'll see this where all the Exchange servers have the same local admin password, but the file servers didn't. It's because they created one Exchange server and then they cloned it for you got CAS servers and mailbox servers, and nobody's got time to build each one of those up manually or change the local admin password. How do we solve this? Oh, this is definitely for shot glass. How do you solve this problem? Lapse. What's lapse? Back there. Thank you, because I couldn't remember the acronym. Local Administration Password Solution. I like it. Where does it store the passwords? Active Directory. Who said that? Oh, you got a shot glass. Oh, sorry if I hit you. Apologize. All right. Yeah, so basically what happens is if you use lapse, you can solve this problem, right? So what it does is when a machine is enrolled in lapse, it changes the local administrator password to something unique. And then it's stored in Active Directory in a field that only users with special permissions can then go read. And so the thought behind it is storing a unique password in Active Directory that only certain people can read is better than having the same password, because clearly what happens now is I may have not had domain admin at this point, but if I've got a dozen machines like shown on the screenshot here where I've got local admin, likely I'm going to find something on one of those machines that's going to get me to domain admin. Anybody guess what I'm about to show you? No. No spreadsheet with passwords, no show logged on users and do token stealing. Those are good. Those are all great. No golden tickets. I don't have KGT yet. No. This bypasses almost every EDR product I've seen. Yeah, if you're a pen tester, you're gonna want to see this. Converge One, CrowdStrike. I get past all of them with this. If you're running a web server that's running an application server, you're going to have an app pool. A lot of times these app pools, so basically an app pool is basically hey, I need to run a web application, but that web application has to have some kind of a domain privilege in order to get its job done. Well, if you're not doing the LSAS credential secure storage, you're going to have a domain credential and clear text in the app pool configuration. And so if you run app CMD and you dump the text of the app pools, you will get clear text usernames and passwords out of the app pools. And so if you've got WinRM or WMI exec or some kind of way to run remote code execution, hell, if you can then RDP into the host, you can just run app command. If this is a web server and you're running a good web application, in the particular case that this is actually from my lab, not from the environment, but the environment I was testing, it actually gave me the Veeam credentials in clear text. What do you think Veeam's got access to? It's usually, I've never not seen Veeam be a domain admin. And their credentials are typically stored in clear text in the app pool configuration. So go run this in your networks on anything that's running IIS app pools. Go run your app pool, list app pool. Actually, you don't even have to do a specific app pool. You can actually do, you can just do text star, and then they'll actually give you the text of every app pool, and then you can kind of grep out your usernames and passwords. And you'll hopefully know that you've configured it. Should be a service account, should be limited. You should be using your LSAS protections for doing secure storage of credentials. It's rare. And if I don't see a username and password here, I'm guessing that you probably have a configuration file in the application itself that has a credential in it. So this is a big hint. If you dump the app pools and you don't see a credential, you're like, this has got to have some credential somewhere that's got network access. Then go look in the IIS application directory, and there's probably a config file that's got a credential in there. Looking at you, Thycotic. All right. So that's I've never been stopped by an EDR because this is a built-in. If you see, I'm actually running Windows System 32 iNet Server app command. This is when you install IIS as a service, you're going to get this along with it, right? So this is a tool. So I'm living off the land. I'm not like running some hacker tool. I'm running your system administrator tools that they've got access to on the box. Question. So the question is in the last couple of month or so, they've broken in Falcon in particular, Falcon and specifically, broken -X, -X. So -X is like, it doesn't just do WMI, it does like 3 or 4 different, by everything, right? And then the -X does it as PowerShell. In those cases, what I found in most people's environments, no. Most environments are set to alert, not block. You don't want to stop that. You know, someone's going to use it and not be broken. However, Sentinel-1 will block it. Like, we'll block -X, right? It'll also block a lot of commands using lowercase x, using WMI. I haven't seen anything block. If you've got WinRM enabled, I've never seen any EDR product. So go ahead and you try WinRM. Maybe it's configured. Likely. Oh, I haven't seen that yet. I'm excited. Maybe it'll happen. Yeah, but like I said, a lot of times when it's broken for certain commands. This is a command that your EDRs aren't going to block because it's a Windows trusted command. I'm just running and there's certain ones where like, oh, why are you running netuse or some, who am I is the number one that'll get you'll get flagged in a hurry. And what happens in a test where you're caught by EDR is that either you or the host will become isolated. Like all of a sudden you can't talk to it anymore. Be like, oh crap, I gotta send an email and be like, sorry. Yeah, so be careful. If you're a pen tester, make sure that you're doing things following the rules of engagement for your engagement. Some organizations like to see that. They want to have that fire where they've got 30 servers that are now isolated from the rest of the network. Some do not. I drink at both. All right, so this is at Pohl. So like I said, most EDR products let this through. So even if you do a who am I, don't do a who am I, run this one instead. And I'll often only run it on hosts that I know are running a web server, do smart things, right? All right, so the next kind of coercion mechanism I'm going to talk about is authenticated petipotum. Does anybody know what petipotum is? Pen tester, yeah, Derek. Yeah. Well, so petipotum, there's a CVE back in 2021 where you could talk to a domain controller and say, "Hey, domain controller, I want you to connect back to me," and the domain controller will connect to you and do an NTLM V2 handshake to you, and that was bad, right? For obvious reasons, right? If I can get you to connect to me, then I can do bad things elsewhere. So that was patched. But petipotum still lives on. I don't know if you know this, as long as you've got NTLM on your domain controller, if I have a user credential and a password, I can get your domain controller to authenticate to me by using petipotum with a credential. So in this screenshot here, I'm calling the petipotum script. I'm sorry, it's highly redacted, but there's an IP address, which is me. There's the IP address of the domain controller, and then you pass it a username and password. And what happens is I connect to that RPC service on the domain controller, and I get it to because I'm authenticated to it. I prove that I am who I am. They're like, okay, well, user, I trust you, so I'm going to do that authenticated handshake back to you. Well, then I will take that connection back to me from the domain controller, and I will relay that. And I will, in this particular case, I will relay it using my friend NTLM relay X. But this time, instead of targeting LDAP or targeting SMB, I'm targeting your ADCS. Was everybody here last month when Trevor was talking about ADCS? Anybody know what ADCS is? It's the Active Directory Certificate Services. And so this is a service that issues TLS certificates for your environment. In this particular case, so there's a couple tools out there, like NTLM Relay X is a good one. Certipy is another fantastic tool. I'm exploiting, in this particular case, what's called Escalation 8, where you've got web enrollment enabled. And in this particular client network, they had client signing enabled. So this is why client signing is not an end-all be-all. So they connect to me, and because I'm changing protocols to a server that does not support NTLM signing, I can now say, remove that MIC from that client signing request, go to the server, do the NTLM handshake, and now the domain controller is connecting to me. I'm connecting to your Active Directory certificate server, and I'm getting it to issue me the domain controller's certificate. So once I have the domain controller certificate, what can I do? Anything that the domain controller can do, right? Including talk to another domain controller and say, hey, domain controller, I need all the passwords again. Can you just give me that whole database? And it will, because you've got the credential of that domain. What you do, you have to take the certificate, and you take the certificate and you go and retrieve the NTLM hash. And with that NTLM hash, then you do pass the hash to another domain controller, prove that it's pure domain controller, and say I want to do a DC sync with it, which is basically I want to get the entire password database from it, which is a normal function for domain controllers to do, even though I'm coming from a different IP than the other domain controllers ever seen. And then I'll actually get all the passwords for every user across your entire organization. So it's not domain admin, but I will go get the domain admin password hash at that point. So this is really dangerous. So if I have a user credential and you've got web enrollment on your ADCS in your environment, I'm going to be DA, because I'm not exploiting a weak certificate, or I'm just using the functions that you've enabled in order to gain access to all of your infrastructure. All right. So that's all my relaying fun stuff. I think that's the last. Oh no, there's going to be one more. Man, there's always one more relay. But even security tools can be misconfigured. Okay, so this is the last category. I saved the best for last. Who's watching the watcher, right? So one of the issues that I've seen, and even when I was in network administration, security tools often have the weakest link sometimes in your organization, and in particular around management interfaces of security tools, right? I'm not joking. The security tool management interfaces are the worst. And in this particular case, I found what's called Snare. It was actually a custom branded version of Snare for SecureWorks. It was installed on, this was a client network. This was actually installed on a mail server. It looked like they had been using this, and the only 2 machines left in their entire environment had this agent installed. And it was expired as of August 2020. So it seems likely they used this, they removed it from the entire organization except for a couple of servers. And by default, there's a web administration panel that when you're running, so what Snare is it grabs all your system and event logs, and it log aggregates it in your network to your SIM, so that you can do event monitoring and correlation and all those fun things. Well, apparently, by default, the management interface for Snare doesn't have any authentication. Yeah, no authentication. I'm like, well, I was looking around here. I'm like, well, it's really just providing a lot of information. It's not doing anything. And except I came across this lovely page that had a path. It says for export heartbeat to file. I'm like, I have no idea what this is. It wasn't checked, so it wasn't configured, and it was pointing by default to see Snare heartbeat. So somehow this thing must heartbeat or write to a file constantly, so then you can make sure, is Snare even running, right? Is my log aggregation running or not? And somehow using this in order to determine whether or not the service is healthy. Well, so what I did, I just check marked the box, and then I changed the path. Instead of being C snare, heartbeat. I changed it to my attacking server, and then I gave it, snare or just some random path. So now I'm not protocol poisoning to get you to do a handshake to me. I'm actually making a configuration change of this tool to have this tool say, oh, I need to write this file to this remote server. Cool. So as soon as I hit the change configuration button, this thing's going to try to write to my file server, do an NTLM v2 handshake with me. And in this particular case, and it does it as the domain's machine account. So this is a privileged function, right? Because it's got to have access to all your privileged logs. It's doing all the log shipping. So it's actually going to be doing it it's going to be doing it as the domain join machine account. And this is a mail server. And for some reason, this mail server was somehow configured to be an administrator of the domain controller. And in this particular network, the domain controller was misconfigured. One of the domain controllers was misconfigured to not have the SMB signing enabled. So literally, I hit the button, and we get an admin session on a domain controller. What can you do with an admin session on a domain controller? Everything. You can dump the entire password database. That's what we did. So, and it was because of a weakness in your security tool that caused this to be a vulnerability in your network. So, who's watching the watcher? Make sure that you're auditing your security tools also. Any questions? All right. This is really the end of the main content of my presentation. I did want to throw out there, we're starting to do on-demand courses. I don't know if anybody here has taken my pen test for IT professionals. It's not on demand yet, but we're just now launching a cyber first responder course. And so this is our first one we're launching. We have a special SecDSM discount code. It's right there. It's SecDSM 9873. I don't know where they came up with that, but you can get a discount. If you want to do an on-demand course with us, you can definitely do that. Like I said, you can email me later or something like that. If you want, and reach out, connect with me. You can find me wherever social medias are minted. I'm on LinkedIn. You can send me a LinkedIn request. Follow me on Twitter or all the places. So it's Discord. I'm on Discord. Just hit me up in Discord. Anyways, I thank you so much. I really appreciate the time and the fun talk. I thank you for the interaction and the whiskey. Brandon, this whiskey is amazing. All right, thanks everybody. Any further questions before we part? Oh, how do I detect all the unauthenticated stuff? Responder will do that for you. Like you just fire it up, and it's going to be like, I'm seeing requests for LLM and R. I'm seeing requests for NetBIOS, and so you can actually see that your network's already doing it. There's just nobody answering, and so I just sit up and be like, "You're asking me the question. I'm going to give you a stupid answer." It's like Charlie Brown, right? Like, answer is a nickel, right answers are a quarter. I'll give you a dumb answer every day of the week. Protocol relaying. Correct. So in general, so basically the question is, you can't relay from any protocol to any other protocol that does NTLM. Each module is written independently. So like SMB module by default can go to LDAP and HTTP and so forth, but it's not a one-to-one mapping. And some of them you can just capture handshakes and do the handshake. Some of them, like the RPCs, I don't. It depends on, and if they have RPC signing. What? Correct. I've done that, You escalation 11 in Certify, yes, 100%. to I tried it in labs, but not your lab. That's awesome. I've only done the corrosion to RPC one time in the recent history, and it was a network. Actually, I hacked on the ImPacket to make it work right. So I did an ImPacket hack to do it to get it to respond to me. Because it's a different level of impersonation, and so you've got to have that special code in there. The handle was the EC, the protocol dialect, in order to relay to that particular RPC endpoint. Yeah, but it can be done, and there's people out there that do it, and there's random what are they called? Not forks. It's the branches. Thank you, God. I've been out of development too long. Random branches out there that you can switch to. Yeah, that can coerce that. Anything else? Oh, what's your question, sir? Who in this room is not Tom Pohl? That's funny. I don't know, man. I haven't seen him. He's out there. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic night.